Well, good morning to all who are in attendance of the production research meeting today, this 24th day of November 2020. We will hear and have opportunity to ask questions regarding research on 2020 variety and nutrient aspects of dry bean production. Welcome to the Michigan Bean Commissioners, Production Research Advisory Board members, and all producer viewers and guests. I am Steve Ewald, Chairman of the Production Research Advisory Board. I will start with how we ended up on Zoom today. It's simple. It's COVID-19. It's been a very difficult year for many. It's not over, yet business must progress. We're looking forward to the possibility of reaching even more growers than as if we were holding in-person meetings. I'll ask that you remain muted until you need to comment. And at this time, I'm going to turn the meeting over to the very knowledgeable MSU dry bean specialist, Mr. Scott Bales. Scott.
Thank you for the introduction, Steve. I certainly appreciate being here today, and thanks everybody for logging on in this new era that we're living in. We'd love to be, in person at our typical regional meetings, but this year we're going to try something a little different, and who knows, maybe we'll like it. So I titled today's talk, 2020 dry bean research. I called it genetic and agronomic advancement. I kind of think that's really the two core areas that we've worked in and our research has taken. And we're going to take about the next 50 minutes here to share a little bit about what we learned this year. So I'll start with just a general overview of the 2020 dry bean performance trials. When these did come into MSU, they did change name a little bit. These are still the typical PRAB variety trials that we've known for many years now. Within these trials, we had 148 entries across 10 different market classes. So they're definitely some of the more expansive, if not the most expansive variety testing that we're doing in the U.S. Right here in Michigan. If we look at average yield across all those classes for our 5 locations this year, we had a pretty good year in the trials. These are organized top down with Huron here at the top, averaging 32 bags per acre across all classes. And then most of our trials here stayed in that high 20s to low 30s. And then Sanilac was a little bit lower. We did have some water damage early and some stress that carried on, till just about flowering in that. And we see that in our yield data. So we look at these locations. We always want to thank our cooperators. They do a great job for us and really go out of their way to offer us some highly productive farmland in bean country. And we definitely appreciate all the efforts they have. The trials that we'll talk about the most are these first 4 that are located in the Thumb and Saginaw Valley. These trials all are completely identical. So that really offers us some statistical or mathematical power when we look across those locations, and then not only locations as we begin to build data over years for those locations. And then our last one down at the bottom that's not within that box, down in Montcalm County at Brian Jaquay's farm. That is our large seeded location under irrigation, where we're looking at kidney and cranberry beans that are more suited to that production region. So here's a quick overview of what you'll find when you do look at the full report, which is available on michiganbean.com/research. This is table 3 in that report. I just wanted to briefly go over how to interpret these results when you do sit down to study them. Our first column here, we have variety in our entries. The easiest way to understand what each of these are is generally if a variety carries a name, it's commercially available. If it's coded in a number such as this, that's generally considered experimental and will be looked at for possible future release. The next 5 columns here, we have some agronomic type information that are collected across these. These include maturity and days after planting, flowering date also from days after planting, plant height at maturity, visual lodging rating that I perform on those on a 1 to 5 scale. 1 would be a bean that's completely erect, and a 5 would be a bean that has completely lost its structure and fallen flat on the ground. And then the last column there we have is white mold infection. And these are actually taken on a percent incidence. So I'll go through every plant in that stand and count it as either infected or not infected, and then calculate that percent per variety. The next 4 columns, we have our typical county yields that we've always seen. for Bay, Huron, Sanilac, and Tuscola County for these navy beans that we're looking at now. And how to interpret the statistics on these. You'll see that some of these numbers do have asterisks next to them and some have 2 asterisks next to them. When we look at Blizzard here in that green circle in Bay County at 3646 with 2 asterisks, that was our highest yielding entry within that trial numerically. However, the one above it, Armada at 3147 with 1 asterisk, was not statistically different from Blizzard. And those asterisks work that way for all columns that you'll see across all 4 locations, as well as our 1, 2, and 3-year averages. 2 and 3-year averages that we have are compiled across these 4 locations across, just as they say, 1 year in the first column, 2 years in the second column, and then 3 years in the third column. So this is a data that I really like to look at because by the time that we have tested these at 4 locations across 3 years, we're really building up a lot of information on those varieties. And I think these numbers are very helpful in decision making with that sort of mathematical backing. And the last column, which is new for us, is looking at seed size. That was a column that we added new this year for just some general interest of what the seed size of these varieties do look like, a question that we often get. So I'll take a quick break for any questions on the general overview of what we're looking at today. And the duration of the talk, I'll go in depth into each class that we did test.
Scott, this is
Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, Greg.
So can you go back to that white bean trial results? So put your circle there on the 3808 for the medalist.
Okay, let's look across medalists
Yep.
right here in Tuscola County.
Yep. So 2 varieties that have been a staple for us over the years have been medalists and Merlins. If you look at that Tuscola variety or plot result for medalists, it's 3808. Drop down 2, you have Merlins at 2340.
Yep.
How do you justify that big of a spread? Just curious.
So I've had some issues with Merlin in my trials for at least the past 2 years with seed vigor. We've had some rains that have, unfortunately taken place within a few days of planting, and varieties seem to respond to that a little bit differently. And Merlin's been one that has not responded well to it. We've talked to quite a few growers who claim they've seen that and other growers who have not. So it seems to be a pretty isolated thing based on environments, but it's definitely something that's been of concern with Merlin in my trials.
Do you know, does it track with previous crop at all or not really?
That's something that I can't quite answer that. The majority of what we're following is corn. Every now and then we'll get into following sugar beets. But like this year, most everything we followed was following corn.
Thank you.
Do you have a question too, Amy?
Yeah. On maturities that we're getting now, do you feel that we're pushing the maturities just a little bit? Is in our yields tracking that increase in maturity? Because the guys ask, well, are we still going to be desiccating years from now? And it looks like to me, yes, based on the maturities that we're getting into. If you look at some of your newer ones, 15095s, those are 104-day. Do you feel that that's going to be a trend?
Yes, that's a great question about the extended maturities. And it definitely has been something we've been getting into in both navy beans and black beans. The one that I always see is like black bear. We've had that for a few years now, and that can easily be a 104 to 105-day bean. It does offer some pretty good yield potential and some pretty reliable for growers, but it definitely can push that envelope beyond 100 days and generally would require desiccation to move it along in a timely manner. We don't see too many often new varieties that are 90 to 95 days. We still do have some newer ones that come down in between that 95 to 100, but it could be a trend as we go forward to really push that envelope of 100 days. And overall, I think it'll kind of rely on what the growers accept or don't accept based on maturity.
Okay. Thank you, Scott.
Hey, Scott, this is Dan. And don't you think too, you're talking about the desiccation on these longer maturity varieties. I know you sent me some pictures out of some yellower type beans right at harvest season. Do you think we're getting, because of these longer maturity beans and we are out there desiccating, that we are bringing our yield down a little bit because we're desiccating these longer day beans a little bit earlier than we really want to, and the top part of them plants is where we're getting them yellow pick beans from?
That's a great question, Dan. So yeah, in relation to that desiccation timing with these later maturity beans, especially when we're talking navy beans and some of these issues we've had, those two very well could be linked of, pushing that desiccation maybe a little bit earlier than we should have, and then potentially losing yield. I know Christy Sprague, our weed scientist at MSU, has done quite a bit of work looking at that, in both blacks and navies. And we definitely have learned that with that desiccation too early with products like Sharpen and Gramoxone, we can cap that yield off and cause pick.
Scott, Ross Volker here. Do you believe that the farmer might actually get some advantage if you rated? It'd be easy to throw in a rating of green stem, a column, or do you think? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Do you think we benefit from that?
I would think so. Well, that was something we looked at actually evaluating this year, looking at that green stem trait in some of these beans. The issue I've had kind of wrapping my head around it is sometimes it can be environmentally based, as in we'll see it in one county location and not another. So that's something that I've tracked in my notes and have tried to mentally wrestle with the best way to publish that type of information, because that's something that is of great concern to you guys. I'll share some pictures here, especially when we look at navy beans, of some of this green stem and how difficult that can be to manage.